live
Oh,
on
wow.
Facebook with
Yay.
the superhero, talented, deliciously, ecstatically alive Trevor Getzla.
Ah,
Trevor and I did Tantra training together several years ago, as several of the people in this crew have. We were all on there together. And he is an incredible rolfer. He's like an amazing body worker, helps people who have had intense body traumas get well and happy in their body. And he is also a Hakomi psychotherapist, which is a mind body form of psychotherapy. And
counselor. Can't use the word therapist. Get arrested. No,
okay,
yeah,
right.
counselor.
Hakomi magician,
So yeah. Well,
body-based
yeah, totally.
psychotherapy magician.
Yeah.
And he is also a very skilled and well sought after medicine man. So welcome. He's also obviously an expert in attachment theory and has been traveling around teaching loads of workshops. And so we're really lucky to have him here today explaining about attachment theory. So there is obviously a lot of info, Trevor, on attachment theory. And what is the most essential part of attachment theory? What is it, and what is like really essential for us to
Right.
understand to in
Yeah.
the teaching?
It's a big subject. There's a lot out there on it. Some people have varying levels of awareness, and I'll just keep it really basic in general. And then what I think kind of are the big connecting points. There's a ton of information you can get. It's a well-studied behavioral science from the 1950s. Um, so in essence, like attachment theory comes down to like the non-verbal language of connection that we were taught as children. And that was done through the way our nervous system was templated. It's almost like the way we've learned to talk, and our brain is like wired to learn to speak. Well, we're also wired for connection. And how that was taught to us was very early in life and even continuing into now, of patterns of how when our system is dysregulated, like when we were children, young babies, and whether or not another secure, safe nervous system was able to come connect with us, co-regulate with us, and help us re-regulate ourselves. When that goes well when we're children, it creates a resilience inside of us. It gives us the ability to have agency and free will, because we're able to like self-regulate our internal state. And that was templated and taught to us by our parents. If that didn't go well, then we still learned how to connect, but we might have patterns where we really long for connection a lot and chase after people for it. Those are sometimes called more anxious patterns, really clingy sort of. And then there are other patterns that are more distancing, stepping back, deactivations of connection, feeling like their freedom might be lost or trapped, feeling overwhelmed and needing to take space, sort of in a way. And these patterns have been labeled. They're kind of like secondary attachments. There's a lot that can be said about these. The labels are often anxious, secure, avoidant. The secure template is when we really have a good rooting in ourselves and we're able to stay regulated in connection. So the most important things with these is that there's kind of like different levels of things going on with it. The behaviors that go with those labels of secure, anxious, and avoidant, there's like lists you can find on the internet very easily of the general tendencies of how people behave and relate, right? And then there's the biology that's going on, which is that this is all psychobiological, nervous system, organism based. And not only that, it's precognitive. It's happening before the voice in our head. So that connects
deep in there.
It's deep in there. Yeah, it's unconscious in a lot of ways. And to understand it, it's like activating states in a way. And that brings in the other important piece, which is the somatic part of it. And what I mean by somatic is it's the feeling state we're actually having. And so the way that it happens is felt in the body, and so our thinking, our behavior, and the feeling that's generated are all one and the same. And that's the connector of how we can actually begin to do something about it, because we can't just talk ourselves out of it. So,
Right.
Right.
So it's not like you can just suddenly be like, okay, I'm going to be secure now.
Right. We all want that list of characteristics. It's like awesome, right? Like, yeah. And we do tend to be that way when we're regulated in ourselves. It's who do we become when we're dysregulated, when we're uncentered, when we're not, or in some fragmented loop of our little story of thing that we do. And then who and how do we become? And there's particular flavors to it, and they're repeating.
So you can be like secure 60% of the time, and then 40% of the time you go into that's what you're saying?
Yeah. And the most important thing that kind of goes with this on the somatic element of this is that the connection between the somatic and the attachment theory is that these are activating states, that they are rooted in our biology, and that our thinking, the way we think, the way it feels in our body, is all one and the same. And you can use your thinking as like a clue of like, oh, I'm in that state right now where that's been activated. But if you start to act on what your thinking is telling you, it'll tell you you need to do these behaviors. So you see the behaviors of anxious and avoidant, and it's like, well, no one wants to do them, but there's an impulse from inside that then generates the behaviors, and that's the connection to it. So it really does come down to, oh, it's happening through my body as much as it's happening through what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what are some ways somebody can work with their attachment issues somatically?
Well, it's also nice to think of attachment as it's all spectrums, and it's like a learning game, that even the most secure person at some point will break in some way. And like weightlifting, we can become more resilient, more secure. And also if we didn't have it to begin with, if we weren't given that, we can be taught that language, we can be taught how to begin to find what we call secure or grounded or present or centered. It's all the same thing. So the ways that some of the somatic principles help us is, one of the most important ones is through mindfulness. So being aware of ourselves, being able to observe our own state to some degree, to kind of have not a goal, not an anything, and that can become very refined. We can become very in tune with ourselves, and to catch the activations in our system and watch how our mind starts to play its familiar tale of the tape, as it were. We can become aware of like the volume of our nervous system, that if our volume is getting turned up, that it's happening in our physiology, and that our thinking is going with that. And this leads to being able to stay more centered, to be able to regulate, to stay in connection and regulate with someone else, So, and our personal practices give us the opportunity to develop self-regulation, but it's how we bring it into connection that's really important. And that's also kind of the juice of this. This is about connection, that we're hardwired for that.
Right. So this is like, you can do some of the work on your own.
Right.
But you also need the other to really, I absolutely see that in myself, because I feel like I've had, part of my journey has been the journey of self-mastery and spending a lot of time on my own and really going deep with myself. And I'm noticing that as I'm kind of come to this place of, I'm cool as me, like I'm good, suddenly all these new relationships are showing up to show me this next level of, because it's like I can only really go further with a person. And of course, like a sexual partner makes that, it intensifies everything. But
it's like when we're with people too, it is still self-mastery, and we're challenging ourselves of the mastery of mastery of relationships. And as we become more and more whole in ourselves, we are compelled to connect. That is like a natural, and one of the most important like kind of ahas, instead of thinking, oh, I have to figure this all out by myself, is you never figured it out from yourself to begin with. Our template was formed by being nurtured by other beings. Our sense of self came from the nurturing of others. And if things were missed along the way, like that's how, the same way that it was first imprinted is the exact same way the imprint can be changed. And actually what we know from study is relational wounding requires relational healing. Like we can't just run off by ourselves and like deal with all of that. Yeah.
Right.
So it is part of self-mastery. It is part
Yeah.
of your self-work. Like
Well, there's kind of like the cave work, like going to the cave and doing the cave work. And that can be an important part of your work, is like in the cave. But there's a certain point where, you know, the man, say 2,000 years ago, was in the cave mastering his own mind, but what would he have done if he actually came out into the community?
When you also think of like, there's this really cool video that went around of this kind of yoga dad with this child getting super tantrumed and worked up, and he's kicking and screaming in the corner. And the dad is just like sitting there and patient, and he's like open for the connection and making the little bids and cues, and the son is like still kind of, and he's waiting. And then there's this moment where the kid like turns to his dad and like jumps onto him and like wraps his arm around him like a little monkey. And it's like, this is the attack. And there was this safe return to connection and resourcing, and that once the personal struggle was over, it was back to the right. And then that was there. And then and then you can see he kind of kicks and flails for a while. And then at a certain point, he was almost like trying to climb inside his dad. You know, there's like this, and it's like, that is the language we were taught, you know? And it's like, so even the person, like, you can imagine, like you're saying, the cave work is the child kicking and screaming and, you know, having this thing with themselves. And then when that's over, there's that return, right? Like we call this like, you know, like a good enough match and fit. And, you know, that there's like kind of a natural rhythm of connection, rupture, repairs. And this is how we build strong relationships, you know, like, and so we practice that even as adults. And guess what? Your brain doesn't know the difference. It can't tell the difference between little you who didn't get it, maybe as good as it needed, and adult you who's getting it now. And that's how we do the work, you know? So, yeah.
So what does becoming more secure, what does that look like, and how can we work on that aspect of ourselves?
Right. And this is kind of what we're talking about, is like oh, okay, what if we could start to get that template of connection is good, and that turning to others for support and regulation and restoration of our nervous system, and then back to our individuality, that we can start to like hone that groove, that under pressure, all roads lead back to home in a way. You know, we can practice that through our personal practices. We can practice it in our body, things like strength training, other things like that. They're all about this, like, can we stay centered and focused under pressure? You know, the same with like Tantra and sexuality or martial arts and things like Aikido or other things like that. It's like, where do we go under pressure? We can like work on ourselves with that in so many ways. It's not just about attachment. Being good at making repairs in our relationships is another really good one, to come back to that. If you imagine our relationships or ourselves as like a sailboat, how it has a keel, right? Big, heavy weight in the middle of the boat, that when the boat tips, that eventually it kind of rests back to this even keel. And we want to get good at practicing that yes, we're going to get disrupted or have dysregulation with people, but that eventually and we come back to this place where everything is good again together, you know, like just like the child with the father, with that whole thing, they eventually come to the place where everything is okay here. And we practice that. We practice creating that as like a loop so that way, when we're under real pressure, that's exactly what we're going to do. And, you know, you're like Pavlov dog's effects, all roads lead to everything is okay, you know? And then we have like understanding it's about becoming like this sense of becoming whole in ourselves, and that this is about staying whole in ourselves while in connection, you know? A lot of the attachment stuff gets activated 3 to 6 months into relationships, when intimacy itself is becoming the pressure, you know, when closeness and all that, somebody begins to, you know, that's where our attachment stuff kind of begins to really show its
3
like
to
more.
6 months. Okay.
Yeah.
And what about like I'm just feeling like vulnerability is really important. Like being able to have someone that you can trust, safe, to share when you're having these things come up. And if someone can hold you, and if you can hold someone else in their vulnerability, it kind of regulates it, right?
Exactly. You can imagine attachment, especially in relationships, kind of there's like 3 stages to the attachment journey. The first is a lot of this stuff is unconscious. A lot of people discover attachment theory because somebody at some point says, you're kind of doing this thing, and you like read about it or watch some video about it, and you're like, oh my God, like that kind of makes sense, right? And you can see the dances of the attachment types. Like I said, there's lots you can find on the internet about that. So then it comes into someone's awareness. And then at that stage, it starts to be oh, I know I do it even when I don't think I'm trying. Like I have awareness about it, but I don't have control over it yet. And that's where a lot of people are with attachment, is that they can see the patterns, they can understand them, but the journey is actually much more somatic, of how do we actually have it in our body, But at that middle stage, also, you have a lot of where couples or partners or people are able to name that they're having the experience, that they are feeling activated in some way, that we begin to get a common vocabulary around what's happening, so that when it happens, it can be handled so much less disruptively, understand it as an activating state, and together we can find our way back again. And it can actually be couples will work at it together to actually strengthen their, but there's usually an outside source, therapists or other things, that are helping to kind of coach and guide people on how to do that. We know that it takes a good amount of time to repattern attachment. And the more we're reinforcing the experiences in our lives with people, the more it's embedding. You're learning a non-verbal language of connection. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And it's also like wonderful to celebrate the journey, because in our culture, I mean, I've traveled a lot all over the world, and you go to many other cultures and you're like, the kids are completely tied with the parents, and then there's aunties and cousins. There's like these, this attachment issue is not happening in certain other cultures, because there's just always someone trustworthy around. Or at least not as much, not to the same degree. I feel like in our culture, with these two parents that are meant to be like everything to the kids,
nuclear family. Yeah.
The nuclear family, this is like super, super common.
You also get things like helicopter parenting, where parents are hyper focused on the kid, and they're essentially teaching the kid to be more hyper vigilant about their and to, like, there's this nonverbal transmission, or parents who are not available. That's another one, where the child is longing for that.
Right.
We have both of those parents parents who are just really gone a lot, or other things like that. So culture is always playing a role with attachment. And some things, like you said, in more tribal kind of cultures, you would have much more of like you said, a web of connection around the child.
Right. And of course, like, parents also, they're nervous. They need to be in tune with their relaxed, healthy nervous system.
Right. And this is why we see the attachment matrix passed through family lineages. It's like, you can think of it this way. It's like, if your family learned to speak English, English is what you speak with your children, right? And just like this is like the same sort of thing. The good news, again, is any of us can what they call earned secure. We can work our way towards having a more secure nervous system. It's a template. Other people, it's really important to look towards people like psychotherapists, really good somatically oriented psychotherapy and attachment work, because you need an attachment figure. You need a real person to be it with you. It's not what they're saying, it's who they're being with you. And once we have that imprint and that template, we pass it like a good virus to one another, So,
and it's viruses.
Yeah, especially nowadays, right?
We need good ones.
And it's inside of really healthy spiritual communities too, where the symbol of the spiritual teacher is an open, loving, present, stable, centered, here for you, also able to give you autonomy and freedom. These are the signs of the secure place in our nervous system. So there's a lot of ways that we can, acquire healthy attachment figures. When it comes to like the wounding that we've been through, traumas, developmental disruptions, all these things that can happen. You can imagine children who are put into orphanages, other things like that, can really have big wounding around attachment. That isn't, attachment is not pathological in and of itself, However, we can have things that happen to us that have left big echoes in us that keep replaying, you know, and how we form connection. And that's where it's really important to work with skillful people who understand what they're doing in the templating of the relationship, that are able to hold a safe, like you said, safe and vulnerable container, you know. It can happen through Tantra work as well. Because a lot of the attachment stuff is eye-to-eye contact, physiological cues, the feeling of another person there with you. It's embedded in so much of the work of almost everyone you've had on your program, you know, as people who are, you know, mastering in the art of presence and awareness and connection, and seeing where we pull out of that or try and grab it, or all those things, right? It comes up in sexuality big time. It's those little breaks or moments of things, you know, versus that connection in Tantra with our partner, that cycling, it's all the same soup, you know. So there's a lot of ways you can work on the aspects of wounding that we've had, and some people have had big wounding around
big wounding.
Yeah.
So how does someone work with big wounding and trauma they have had that is affecting their ability to be in connection?
It really needs, I'd say it's the big ones are like, you know, things that do require really skillful one-on-one work. If people aren't aware of attachment and trauma and things like that, it can be missed or spiritually bypassed or other things. So it's important for people to have some of these, you know, they're not labels, they're tools, and they're well-studied patterns, if you want to think of it that way. And psychotherapists have some of the most training. They also offer, because of the way their professional licenses are, they offer safe containers, you know, which is really important. For some people, this has to begin in just a really attuned one-on-one connection. And they won't even know it's about attachment at first, but the therapist will, and how the therapist is securing their nervous system and that templating of regulation. So that's the safest route to go, is for sure. You know, and then, like I said, there are varying other ways that can be reinforced, but that primary one-on-one relationship is, in a sense, we're getting reparented. And so you want to be with someone who is skillful and knowledgeable about that. You can look towards people if you have childhood trauma, like I come from child abuse in my family. Look towards people who are used to dealing with intergenerational trauma, attachment trauma, developmental trauma, things around codependency. There's like CODA, you know, like
so CODA works with attachment theory.
In an aspect of it, because codependency could be thought of as it has attachment elements in it. There's a lot of using things outside of yourself to try and stabilize yourself. They may not talk directly about attachment, but that's also a community model, you know, right? So it's
I wanted to hone in on something you said about spiritual bypassing. Can you give me an example of how that happened? Because I think that's probably huge, and maybe even especially in like the spiritual communities. And
sure. And the relation to attachment is we have kind of different ways this can go with attachment. Of course, there's a lot of ways it can go, but in spiritual communities, you can have things that are more on the like, you're supposed to just find yourself. You're supposed to just find God inside you, and that means go sit on the cushion or do whatever yoga or other things that are solo practices, you know. And that's great. But for people who are like longing for that connection from another being that is so essential to our lifeblood, they can be kind of being asked to like go beyond that. Like that's like the animal body, or that's like the what, see what I mean? Like that's just like, and that there's this higher self that you're just supposed to be in, right? And there can be a lot of bypassing around that there actually is the authentic need to connect, right? And that not being met can hold a wound that will be very difficult to work with beyond that, right? And you can have the opposite too, where people are kind of maybe going into, oh, you know, monogamy is a myth or a belief, or, you know, like I'm more spiritual if I'm open, you know, I'm not supposed to feel attached to people or other things. And the truth is we all have bonding inside of us. It's a very powerful thing, right? And there can be the spiritualizing that direction of like not wanting to necessarily fully, you know, but I think there's a lot of like spiritual Jedi-ness in being masterful in connection, you know. So you know, and there's a lot of like finding God through finding connection, you know. So like there's ways that all these can be kind of balanced, but there's also ways they can And it's not that it's that they don't know to acknowledge attachment many times, you know, like there's nothing wrong with their spiritual model, but it may not have a space for this in it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Really powerful. So do you have like an exercise that perhaps you could lead us through?
Sure. So you know, some of the solo things when we do these workshops live with Matt Sturm, hey.
Matt Sturm was on here day 2.
Yeah. So he's my buddy. We do this thing. I do this thing called the somatic experience of attachment. And we have people partnered up with mindfulness exercise. We bring all this stuff to life. Talking about it's cool, but doing it is even cooler, especially doing it with other people, especially if it's people you don't know and all of a sudden you feel the same kind of things. So we're going to take an exercise from that.
Can I ask you one question about what you just said?
Sure.
Because you said people you don't know. So this can, like, our connection and attachments can also be just like in groups, like, because some people are really good at one-on-one in a romantic relationship, but then when they leave the house and are in a group, that's when all their stuff comes out. So this is talking about all different types.
All different types, yeah.
It's not just like a romantic partnership. Is that, I'm just getting it clear.
Yeah, and we'll see attachment things play out in people's work styles and work relationships and other things like that. And the way we do the workshops is generally a whole bunch of people who don't know one another, and at some point they're getting turned towards one another with like mindfulness oriented somatic exercises. And what's interesting is because you don't know somebody, if you feel some of the similar things coming up in you that you would feel with your partner, or that you're like, oh, wait a second, it's not just about them, right? So it gives people this like really interesting, and it also, the cool part is by the end of the night, all these people have connected with one another, and it's like we're offering the thing we're talking about by bringing people together. So yeah.
Beautiful.
So,
I want to come to one.
Okay.
So today's practice.
So the exercise, in a sense, is, you know, like we were talking about in early childhood, there is this imprinting of, often it's a person, but it's not always. So I want to make a few caveats before I really go into this exercise. But the sense that there's a place inside of us with some person who was our attachment figure when we were young, who was the one that we would turn to, who no matter what we were going through, we'd end up in everything is okay, you know. And I want to caveat that with some of us didn't get that, you know, and that there can be that when we do this exercise, for some people, it pulls up a really resourcing connection, but for other people, it can also pull up sensitive or tender or realizing there was none of that there. So I just want to caveat that there's no right or wrongs with what comes up for you, but that this exercise is used to elicit kind of the sense of our internal, what were we given, you know? And it also in the end becomes that self-resourcing exercise as we have that place inside of ourselves filled more and more. Okay,
Beautiful.
Great. Cool. So I'll talk you through it so you can sit down and get really comfy. And we'll also just talk a little bit about mindfulness as we lead you along, so in just the slightest way possible. So a lot of your audience is probably well grooved to kind of the sense of going inside, you know, of just taking this moment to just kind of rest into the body. Yeah, your sense of breath. And there's nothing to do here. You don't have to clear things. You don't have to repeat something. It's just taking the moment of where am I right now? Sense of the room. Many of us may be alone already. You know, and just this kind of quality of what do I notice just now? You know, and with a settling. And there's a very, very particular way we can use mindfulness. And mindfulness is like a lens. We can focus it into very particular places. It's just a awareness. There are different categories that our awareness may be. It may bring up a feeling in our body. It may bring up an image. It may bring up a memory. It may bring up emotions. It may bring up some impulse that something needs to happen. It can bring up meaning. that we've made out of things. So there's all these different ways that it can come forward. And we just want to allow that, just however things come forward. Sometimes they're just quick little flashes too, just a moment. We want to catch them, you know, or they might just be a quick sensation in the body. And like I said, we can use this in really particular ways. So for example, just allow for a moment your world to become the back of your right hand. Just notice how the air meets the back of your right hand, or maybe there's something touching it and some sort of fabric or your body. And it's like just immerse the world in the back of your right hand. You might notice things that you didn't notice before, just from shifting your awareness around. And then if you shift your awareness to the back of your left hand, again, it's like kind of let your world become that. And it might be different in some way, slightly or significantly, your right hand. And again, there might be things you just didn't notice before until you were invited to look a certain direction. We just want to be curious to whatever it is that may come up. And so from there, we're going to go this little journey of, you can take yourself back to an earlier time in your life. And it's the sense of that there was someone or something that generated the sense of everything's okay, that you would turn to them in distress. And it might have been a teacher, might have been a parent, might have been some person who's worked with you at some point in your life. It might have been a grandma or an aunt or an uncle or a friend's parent. Like, might have just been a little bit that they were there a little bit in your life, and it might have been that they were like a major figure in your life. Either way, but it's that sense of, yeah, when I was with that person, they accepted me. They didn't always agree with me, but they accepted me, and then I knew everything would be okay. And see if you can like fill out the images of that. Is there a memory? You know, for me, there's the smell of the flowers at my grandma's house. She had all these flowers in front of her house, and I smell that smell, and there's just there's that memory of going to my grandma's house. And maybe there's like, you know, a particular time in your life where that person was really important, or a particular moment where they really got you. Yeah. So fill out the details of that, and then notice what's happening in your body. Notice what the present moment sensations in your body are. And again, I want to caveat for those who might have more challenging things come up. It's like, yeah, that can happen too. There can be longing, there can be hurt here, there can be blank spots. So just notice whatever comes up, whatever arises. And really file that away. Notice what it's doing for you, like your sense of who you are as you kind of hold this memory, this image, this place of this person, the way you felt when you looked in their eyes. Like, notice the quality in your body right now. And if you were to take a snapshot of your own nervous system and imagine a volume switch, of like, how high is the volume? Yeah, that quality of the presence of that connection, how it affects you. So then as you make your way back a little bit, it's just kind of notice what feels different from before to now. Just encountering this file, you know, we don't have a childhood, we don't have a past. What we have is all these impressions that have been left in us, and they become somaticized. They become the feelings that we are in our body. And behind it is this whole file of information. Right? Yeah. So just notice that quality. Just notice, and we can use you as an example, Shezza, if you want to speak a little. Just notice, how does it feel from where you started to where you are now?
really beautiful. Like I also went to my grandparents,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and I got a lot of flashes of just so many happy memories
Uh-huh.
that I
Yeah.
had with my grandparents. And it was such a safe, fun
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it made me want to call my grandparents.
Right. Yeah.
And the when you ask what is like the kind of energy there, it was just the energy of contentment.
Uh-huh.
It was just
Yeah.
an energy of just total relaxation and
Right.
contentment.
Yeah. And you can imagine that there was probably times that something was disrupted in you, and that this feeling, this contentment, that connection, that if you were off in some way, if you had lost your way with yourself somehow, that if you came back to that person, they would help you find yourself again. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right.
They said the if because I'm involved with some kids right now whose
Yeah.
parents are not present. They're
Yeah.
just too young and not interested in their
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And they were talking about, and so again, their grandparents are kind of, holding it down a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you just have one person in your life that can like ground that energy for you, it's so powerful. It's like makes all the difference.
Huge. Yeah, it's huge. We know from the study of attachment, the cues, there's things called bids for connection. There's these cues that they need to be met about 30% of the time. You only have to be 1 for 3 in meeting the little bids of the attachment cues, and you'll end up with a more secure nervous system. So we don't even have to be perfect, you
Uh-huh.
know?
That's good for the parents on here to know because,
Yeah.
parents get involved in a lot of guilt.
And I do see actually when I've seen quite strongly that parents will see their things they're doing with their children, especially when their children are really young, and they'll see their familiar sort of things, and it can be quite startling for parents to kind of,
Mm.
because they see their children and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm the one doing the distance or clinging or whatever, so it can be a very awakening process for parents who are really paying attention as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah, powerful for parents who
Totally.
want to like get in and do their best without the guilt.
Right. Yeah. The beautiful thing is we have so many resources now. Attachment is a well-studied science. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. My final soundbite on it is it has to turn experiential. It has to go into the felt sense of the body.
Uh-huh.
My final question to you is going to be, what does your body register from that? Like, what do you notice in yourself?
I have this it's funny because I'm in this terrible lighting right now. The internet was downstairs, so I had to come up here, and there's like a window right there.
Yeah.
But it's kind of how I feel. I feel like this glow in my body.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I feel very relaxed. Thank you. And I mean, this is such an important subject. It's like, I'm so happy these tools are getting out into the world. Like, imagine, even from like 10, 20 years ago, there are so many more tools. There's so much more understanding. And I'm just grateful to you for being here and talking about this. I want to come to one of you and Matt's workshops sometime when I'm up in the Bay, which I'm going to be spending a lot of time in the Bay this year, actually. So
I have a feeling once we're all out of our quarantine bubbles, the need to come together will express itself many different ways, including, I'm sure we will get on it with doing some connecting workshops. So
I love that.
If anyone wants to, by the way, just to plug myself, you can find me through Facebook. I offer online Hakomi stuff and all kinds of interesting things somatically. I train practitioners in a variety of things, have the public workshops, got a whole lot going on. So feel free to contact me through Facebook. I'm offering free 30-minute Hakomi intro sessions for people over Facebook video. So, we may as well make the best of our time together. And thanks so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you so much, love.
All right.
Okay, lots of love.
Bye, Shezza.
Take care. Bye.